My name is Michaelis, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm sober today. Thank you guys for having me. I'm sober today by the grace of God and the miracle of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Natalie, thank you so much for asking me to speak again at this meeting. It's definitely an honor and a privilege to be able to participate in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's a little bit more meaningful to me today because the guy who took me through the book just passed away a couple days ago. So it's nice to be able to carry this message and carry on the legacy that was passed on to me that changed my life the way that it did. So thank you again. So I kind of gave a lot of the backstory about how I came to even come into this message and meet the guy who took me through it and stuff like that. But the book work actually really sculpted basically how I share, like even the beginning part of like saying that I'm sober because of the grace of God and the miracle, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, like talking about the miracle, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous really comes from that part in the big book where Roland Hazard meets with Carl Jung, and Carl Jung basically shares with him that, we're totally hopeless. And the suggestion from Mr. Jung or Dr. Jung was that, we find a bodyguard to watch us 24 hours a day, or we have to lock ourselves away in an asylum. And so to me, that really lets me know that, before AA got started, there wasn't a lot of hope for us at all. Like we were really doomed. And so I'm really grateful that I'm born in a day and an age where, this is so readily available. And not only is it readily available, but I mean, it's readily available all over the world. And even in this pandemic thing where, things are getting shut down, like, now we've got Zoom and that whole like sort of prophecy in the forward to the fourth edition about, the internet sort of spreading the message. I mean, even when they wrote that was back in 2001, I think. They had no idea that this was going to be happening. And here we are all over the world being able to do this. So Alcoholics Anonymous is kind of like the original Simpsons, where they just sort of knew everything in the future and just wrote about it, which is kind of cool. So, but yeah, so like I said, God, take away everything I think I know about this book, about this process, and about you guys, so I can have an experience with you. When I got to this process, I had around 10 years of sobriety. And I worked the steps in so many different ways, including the Big Book Awakenings, including lots of the work in the 12 and 12, 12 and 12, plus excerpts of the Big Book, worksheets, like all kinds of different stuff, and even in other fellowships. And, it was easy for me to think that I knew something because of that. And just my time and experience and going to meetings and hearing lots of shares. And I was kind of at a place where this was my last ditch effort to basically see whether or not Alcoholics Anonymous was going to really work for me, because I had a bit of a tumultuous sobriety emotionally. I was in a lot of spiritual malady, even though I didn't really understand what that was until I went through this process for many years sober. And that was basically because I didn't have a spiritual experience. And I didn't even know really what that was. A spiritual experience seemed like this enigmatic thing that was sort of unreachable, that we have moments of or whatever. But I didn't really understand what that was because no one really took the time to explain to me. And it's actually really clear in the book on page 567, where it describes itself as a personality change. And what makes that personality change spiritual is that it's God powered, but I didn't really know how to connect to God consistently and to stay in that space because no one really explained that to me. So that was really the beauty and the revelation of the book. So in that opening prayer, it was like, okay, it was easy for me to sort of let go of everything that I thought I knew about AA, you know, because I knew something was missing, right? But what I really enjoyed about that was the idea of letting go of everything that I thought I knew about God so that I can have an experience with God, you know, and really keeping a clean slate, open mind, and to really seek the God that's around me and what I later found out was within me, you know, through this process. And that was really the beauty of it. And the next thing immediately written in the book is, God, please bury my pride before my pride buries me. And I needed to understand really like, okay, cool. What is pride and how is that even bearing me? You know, and pride is basically broken into two different factions. Basically, there's like the pride, which is kind of like the arrogance, the thinking that I don't need to follow the rules, the thinking that I'm right, the self-centeredness, the thinking that, you know, I don't need to do what everyone else needs to do to get to where I want to go. The judging people as being less than me, all that kind of pride. And then there's the pride in reverse, which I had a lot of experience of, which is, you know, basically I'm a piece of crap. I'm less than, I'm hopeless. The solution is never going to work for me. I'm too messed up for this thing to really take. God doesn't love me. I've been abandoned, like all that victim nonsense, you know. But both those sides of pride are really doing one thing, and they're basically closing my mind to the solution, whether I think I'm above the solution or whether I think I'm too sick for it, you know? And so that was a prayer that was told to me that I can implement whenever I feel the pride cropping up throughout the day. And it was such an easy prayer to remember. And so I really implemented that. And, you know, I don't know, but I was like one of those guys who was literally praying all day. Literally every single time I walked into an AA meeting, God, please bury my pride. My pride buries me, as I walked over the threshold, because I had become that guy who was sitting at the back of the AA meetings with like 10 years of sobriety and seeing these, you know, kids come up there and speak from the podium with 2 years of sobriety or 3 years of sobriety, talking about all these promises that are happening for them and their dream jobs and this happening and blah, blah, blah. And me just like literally hating them and wanting to choke them out, you know, and being like, F you and your promises, like, because I just didn't think that that stuff was possible for me. So to sort of let go of that pride and be like, okay, cool, what is my purpose at this meeting? Which I later understood just below that when we go over the circle of the triangle. That was really helpful. So the next thing, again, we circled the idea of like, you know, the fact that we do recover from alcoholism. And it was important for me to understand also that the 9th step promises are promises, and they're fantastic, but there are promises all throughout this book. You know, it's not just the 9th step promises. And the very first promise is before the book even really gets started. And it's just that we do recover from alcoholism, right? We recover. And it's not just about sobriety, it's like recovery. Recovery is a, you know, full-on mind, body, and spirit experience, you know, and really what that means to have recovered for me is to be living with a conscious contact and access to the power of God in each moment of every day, you know, and to really feel that and to feel that peace as I live my day, right? So immediately we get into the circle and triangle. And that was like a huge, huge, simple revelation for me though, you know, and that was a spiritual awakening for sure. And that was the idea that, okay, cool. There's 3 parts of my disease and there are 3 parts of the solution specifically for each part of the disease, you know, and I did not really know that. I mean, I knew that I had an allergy to drugs and alcohol. That wasn't super important to me because when I got sober, the sober living that I went to really just drummed in the idea that I can't trust my thinking and that I don't know anything and that whenever I think, I create unmanageability in my life, right? that was kind of the whole second half of the first step idea that was really drummed in, which was the motivation of, you know, working the second step, which I'll talk about later on in this talk. But no one really had took the time to basically help me understand the importance of acknowledging the physical allergy. I remember when I did the Big Book Awakenings, and it talks about, you know, some will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of this book. The guy who was taking me through the Big Book Awakenings asked me, like, are you interested in the medical estimate of the plan of this book? And I was like, not really. You know, I didn't really care that much, because to me it was more about, I can't trust my thinking. My thinking is what I'm left with sober, and that's really the problem. So that was enough for me. But understanding the physical allergy is really understanding what really makes me an alcoholic and an addict, right? Like, that's really what separates me from people who can drink and use moderately. Because I have this thing that gets triggered once I put any drugs or alcohol into my body, that, you know, people who are temperate or moderate drinkers don't have. And I needed to be able to see that, okay, cool, I have a physical craving, right? Not just a mental desire or a, you know, mental want for drinking and using, but an actual physical craving that gets triggered. And none of these things were really explored before this book worked for me, because I hadn't thought about it that deeply. But once you start, or once I started going through the book in this kind of detail, it really made me think about, okay, cool, what am I actually talking about now? You know, what do I actually have? So how do I know that I have a physical desire? You know, well, I needed to look, you know, back in my history, and this comes from the doctor's opinion, where he basically talks about, you know, people wanting to drink. I mean, people drinking when they had something that was like positive happening in their lives, right? They wanted to celebrate some great thing, that or great opportunity that happened for me. And there were times for me where, you know, when I was drinking and using, you know, the universe was definitely still providing me opportunities. You know, I remember that I was modeling when I was a kid, and I, you know, had done some stuff in the States. And my agent finally came to me and said, you know, you get to do a Jill Sanders campaign overseas. They want to hold you for that, right? So I got, you know, really excited, and this is something I was really stoked about. And the day that I found out about it, I was like, cool, I'm going to go celebrate with my friends. And so we all went to the Garden of Eden, which was a very popular place back in the day. This was like in the 90s. And this is when DJ AM was still fat and playing there. But anyway, I went there, and that was my, you know, place to party. And that night wound up turning into 4 months, another jail sentence, and me missing the Jill Sanders campaign. So did I have the intention of being in jail again? Did I have the intention of that one night turning into a 4-month run? Absolutely not. My mental intention was to just party with my friends and celebrate something that was awesome and a great opportunity for me. But as soon as I put those drugs or alcohol in my body, I lost control. And that's really the first half of the first step. You know, it's the powerlessness aspect. You know, it's like, I don't have any power once I put drugs or alcohol in my body. And that is really the body aspect of this disease. And then there's the mind aspect. Okay, cool. So I had been sort of brought up to the idea that, okay, cool, I'm insane. I know that because people told me that. I can't trust my thinking. I know that because people told me that. But, you know, a lot of people throw around this sort of therapist, like psychiatric idea of obsession in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, where, you know, people are constantly sharing about constantly wanting to or thinking about using drugs or alcohol all the time. And for me, that wasn't really my experience. And mostly because I was high all the time. So I wasn't thinking about it all the time. It was already happening. I was doing it, you know, so it wasn't like that kind of an obsession. So when the book really describes it as the ability to believe a lie, that was something that I could really relate to, you know. The end game lie is that, okay, cool, I don't have the physical allergy. Like that's the lie that eventually I'm going to believe if I continue on the path of believing a lie. But then it also made sense, okay, cool. People always talk about rigorous honesty in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, or in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, I should say. And I didn't understand why. And now I understand, like, striving for rigorous honesty. And the reason why is that if I'm not striving for rigorous honesty, then basically I'm striving to believe a lie, or I'm open to believing that lie, you know. And that comes alive in that story with Fred, you know, with the mental blank spots of like, you know, one day if I'm not working on consciously trying to be rigorously honest, eventually I'm going to believe this lie that I can pick up a drink and it's going to be okay. In fact, I may not even have a thought about it at all because I'm just living in this lie. And then I had to start thinking about, what are the lies that I believe, you know? And I started seeing, like, you know, walking into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and saying hello to a friend and them not really seeing me, and then me sitting in my seat because the meeting started and me thinking they didn't say hi to me, and then like writing this whole story in my head about, like, you know, this person having a resentment against me, and then all of a sudden, like, my pride kicks in and I've got a resentment against them, and by the time the meeting is over, like, I hate that person, you know. And those were the kind of lies that I was believing, you know, and that just went throughout my day. Like, and I got to start to see, you know, the stories that I was believing all throughout my day. And that was also like brought up in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, where they talk about, you know, the sound reasoning, you know, with this parallel thinking of, you know, this lie that we believe, you know, and just how subtly, like, okay, here our sound reasoning is going along and it's telling me to get up at this time because I have a meeting at this time. It's telling me I should take a shower because I smell, and it's telling me that, you know, I should brush my teeth so I don't offend anybody. It's telling me to get on my motorcycle, and it's getting me to that place by driving and all that stuff like that. But meanwhile, I've got this other thinking that's just subtly weaving itself into it, which is, you know, what if they know that you're a fraud? Or, you know, what if this thing fails? And it's like all these little fears and stuff like that. And before you know it, I mean, because it's being woven so subtly into it, I think that it's my sound reasoning, but it's not. It's this other narrative that I've got going on that really has nothing to do with reality. And if I am not aware of that, and if I just, you know, wholeheartedly believe that narrative, then all of a sudden I'm living the story. I'm living the lie. And that's where my brain can take over out of nowhere, and boom, I'm high again. I didn't even know what happened. And that's why so many people, you know, when they relapse and you ask them, like, you know, what happened? They're like, I don't know, you know, and that makes sense to me now. And last but not least, the spiritual malady. So I didn't really understand what a spiritual malady was, you know, and I didn't even really understand what the word malady was. It really just means illness, you know, a spiritual illness. But they describe it in the book, you know, as being the worry, the anxiety, the depression, the jealousy, the resentment, the fear, you know. That's the spiritual malady. And it's funny because it's so many things that, like, you know, psychiatrists and psychologists are, you know, diagnosing today as bipolar or depression or anxiety disorder. And it's so easy to give a pill out for. But, you know, a lot of that stuff I found was spiritual malady. And I'm one of those people that took those pills. You know, I'm one of those people that, you know, before I got sober, of course, I was diagnosed with ADHD because that was a very popular diagnosis in the mid-90s. And, you know, shortly after that, I was diagnosed with depression because me and my mother tried to kill ourselves together. And then I was diagnosed with depression again in sobriety because I tried to kill myself twice in sobriety in the first 10 years because I was sitting in so much overwhelming spiritual malady. You know, and I just didn't see that. And for me personally, and this is my personal experience, I'm not saying anything about medication because I have no opinion about it, but my personal experience is that it just didn't work for me. It wasn't the answer, you know, and I really wanted to try a different way. Now, if this book didn't work the way that it did, then, you know, maybe I'm sure I'd be having a different conversation. This conversation wouldn't be happening, but the book work definitely treated all of that stuff. So then it was explained to me the 3 parts of the program. All right. And this was a revelation for me. So what I understood was that the way that I treat my body is in the meetings. Okay. And the reason why, or it's just fellowship in general. Meetings are a part of that. So anytime that I'm hanging out with another sober individual and like 12-step sober individual, I'm literally just treating my body, which allowed me to let go of so much expectation that I had and that I put on meetings. Because, you know, before that, I thought like when shit was really bad or if I was in a really traumatic experience, I got to get to a meeting, you know, that's going to save me, you know, and that's going to make me feel better. And the truth of the matter is that sometimes I went to meetings and I left and I excuse my language, I hated it even more. You know what I mean? I hated it. Like I felt worse, you know, because all these people would be happy and weird. I'd feel like not a part of this. And I'd be like, oh, this is awful, you know? So to understand that really when it boils down to it, what I get out of a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous is I get to treat my body. And what that means is that I'm putting myself in a position where I'm not going to be taking drugs and alcohol because I'm not isolating in the home. I'm not at the club. I'm not at the dealer's house. And I'm not, you know, at a liquor store, you know, or wherever trying to get drugs and alcohol to my body. And you guys, hopefully, are not giving me or selling me dope, right? So I'm literally staying physically sober. So that's what the purpose of a meeting is for me in the beginning. And that made sense. Okay, cool. That's why we tell newcomers to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. Or, you know, I was told to go to 90 meetings in 30 days. Because going to a lot of meetings gives us space from our old friends, our old, you know, places that we used to hang out with. And, you know, we get to actually give ourselves a break from drugs and alcohol, hopefully. And they tell about going to meetings early and staying late and fellowshipping between the meetings. And they're just really trying to get us to be around other sober people so that we're not getting high. It was that simple. So all that started to make sense for me. And like I said, it took away my expectation of, you know, what I was supposed to get out of meeting. And that doesn't mean that there's sometimes I go to meetings and I feel really connected and I feel really good, but it basically allowed it to be, you know, an acceptance of what meetings are actually for, right? And it allows me to, when I feel like I'm in danger of using, which I, you know, haven't in a really long time because I've been really diligent about this work, I know what I need to do. I need to get to a meeting. The way that I treat my mind, that mental obsession, the ability to believe a lie, is through recovery. Now, what the book says is that the recovery is actually found in the book. That's the original form of the AA message. So that also means that recovery is not necessarily found in the meetings. And once I knew the book more, the less I heard recovery in the meetings, actually. And that's not coming from a place of judgment. It's just really coming from a place of, you know, the fellowship has changed and the message in the fellowship has changed, you know. And that really doesn't become super important to me until the forward in the second edition, where they start talking about the different percentages of recovery rates, you know, and me comparing those percentages versus the percentages today, you know, and also my personal experience. So it was nice to know that, okay, cool. If I want recovery, and if I really want to treat that mind, then I need to be in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which means that going to a meeting to try to find recovery or get recovery, again, lessening that expectation of what a meeting is supposed to be for me, right? Because if I'm thinking about going to a meeting to get recovery, then I'm really, you know, I start judging the sharers, I start judging the speakers, you know, they're preaching too much or they're whining too much, or that person didn't talk about recovery, or that person just shared a drunkalog, or all those thoughts that, like, you know, would go through my head going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, just because I put too much of an expectation on what AA was supposed to give me in that moment, because I didn't know what part of AA was what solution for me. And the spiritual malady, that is through service work. Now, of course, the most efficient way for me to be of service is to take as many people through the big book as possible. Now, the reason why that's the most efficient is because that treats all three sides of the triangle. Where do I find people? Well, I need to find them in meetings, right? What am I reading with them? Well, I'm reading the big books. I'm treating my body, my spirit, and my mind all at the same time, you know? And that changed everything for me, because now I'm no longer going to meetings to judge the sharers or judge the speakers or to see that girl or to hang out with my friends or whatever. I'm going there to try to find somebody to help, you know, which makes every single meeting a good experience, because I'm really just living my purpose, right? Also, to understand that service work is treating the spirit. Treating the spirit is to perfect and enlarge my spiritual life, or to connect to or access the power of God. Like, it's all that stuff. So it's really big, you know, and that's really what I understood from that part that we all write in our book. If I really understand who I am, I, the light of God, my spirit will be joyful at all times. That was one of the most profound things that I'd ever written anywhere, you know, because what I needed to do is I needed to deconstruct basically who I thought I was, you know, and I had been sober long enough to build myself a pretty big life. You know, I was DJing all over the world. I had production stuff that I was doing. I had relationships. I had money. I had, you know, a nice house in West Hollywood. I, you know, had all the stuff. I had a lowrider truck because I'm Mexican. That's right. And, you know, all those things that I wanted that I thought defined me, I had, but none of that shit means anything, you know? And like, even the roles that I play in other people's lives and the roles that they play in my lives, like, that doesn't mean anything either. Because really what I am is I am the light of God. And then also, you know, I work with so many people and they're also writing that they are the light of God. So it really sort of equalizes every single being in my life, you know, and being, I mean, like, all of you guys are, and this is going to sound really strange to some of you people, but are like a part of the same thing that my dogs and my cats and the geckos and the butterflies and everything is a part of. For me, you know, we are all a part of this power, you know, so I need to treat everyone and everything accordingly, which really is the grace, you know, because what that does is it launches me into the fourth dimension of existence, because I have a purpose in the moment. The fourth dimension is when space meets time, right? So it's the absolute present. So through being of service-minded really launches me into the present constantly, you know, because I'm constantly thinking, how can I be of service to that moment, you know? And the only way that I could do that was to, you know, start with the training wheels of working the program, you know, and I say training wheels is because that's the beginning of it, you know, and that whole part of the book is what seemed a flimsy read proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. I mean, sitting across from somebody and reading a book seems pretty flimsy, but you know, when I see it as a tool to practice being of service, practice, you know, living my divine purpose, practice launching myself into the moment, practice, you know, not having an expectation on what someone else does with the book work once I'm done with them, you know, which allows me that healthy detachment and allows me to just deal with what's in front of me. I mean, that is God right there. Then it talks about, you know, this process is not to make me dependent on a sponsor, but to enable me to become dependent upon God. So that shifted everything also for me too. That was another revelation, because, you know, I was sort of brought up in a fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous where sponsors, you know, came with this sort of connotation of like, there's some sort of authoritative figure. You know, I used to go to them for direction. I used to go to them to run my thinking by them. I used to go to them for relationship direction and job direction and all kinds of, you know, stuff where I was becoming like dependent upon these people, you know, and I'd you know, given ultimatums to my sponsees. If you don't do this, then blah, blah, blah. I mean, like all kinds of crazy stuff. And, you know, what I started to understand was all that's really nonsense. You know, I don't want anyone dependent upon me. I'm not any guru. And I definitely don't want to be dependent upon another being, because I've had sponsors let me down. I've had sponsors betray me. And when I was so dependent upon them, or basically, placing that human resource above my relationship with God, then it really messed me up, and I had some, real sort of victim-y thoughts in sobriety. And the truth is that I don't need those thoughts. And this book basically promises freedom from that. So the reason why I carry the book message is because it's not my message, which means that I'm not attached to or thinking that I know something, or thinking that, my way works or whatever. I'm literally just reading someone else's message that knew way better than me, And so it keeps me out of like the personal sort of attachment to, people following my direction, because it's not my direction. And it also allows me an easier time with working with people, because it sort of depersonalizes the idea of me being an authority in other people's lives. When we sort of take away that kind of like uneven whatever, it makes it a lot easier for people to listen, because that pride gets settled a little bit, because we're all in the same place, just trying to connect to a power that's way beyond any individual human being, right? So all this stuff also changed the way that I sponsor people. The beautiful thing about this book is that it allows us to get into doing the work immediately, and what I mean by the work is working with others, because, what we learn when we do the triangle and the circle part is that, and some of you who aren't working with other people, I don't know if any of you are or not, but what I soon learned was that, truthfully, if I'm not working with other people, and I mean literally like taking other people through the book, I'm not working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It doesn't matter how many times I'm praying. It doesn't matter how many days I spent decorating my God box. It doesn't matter how many Pilates or yoga classes I go to, or how many spiritual retreats or ashrams I visit. None of that shit matters. If I'm not taking other people through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, then I'm just not working the program as it was outlined, and it talks specifically about how to work that program. They use words like blazed, which means to burst out suddenly intensely. They use words like frantically, which means like obviously frantic. So, it changed my idea of like, okay, cool. I need to proactively go out and find as many people as I possibly can, because our public relations are about, attraction rather than promotion, not our relations with each other in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know what I mean? It also dispelled all the ideas of anonymity, and what I soon learned was that if someone is coming to me with something that's fear-based, then it's not the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because if the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is all about connecting to the power of God, and the God that I pick for my life is one that loves me, wants the best for me, takes care of me, forgives me no matter what, then there's no fear in any of that, right? Because something is loving me, wanting the best for me, and taking care of me no matter what. So it's not in line with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous if it's fear-based. So if someone is coming to me with anonymity stuff because, they're afraid this person's going to find out, they're afraid they're going to get judged by this person, they're afraid they're going to lose this job, and that's not Alcoholics Anonymous. And once I read the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they broke down the 3 reasons for anonymity, the first being of service, the second being about, everyone being on an even playing field. And the third one about, okay, cool. No one should elevate themselves as the example, because it's going to allow us to not also be of service to people in need. I got to see that there wasn't fear in that either, So it really, going through this process really dispelled a lot of the stuff that I heard in the fellowship versus what's actually the program of recovery. So anyway, that was basically the first page, and that was a huge revelation for me. Now, again, it changed my ideas of, the steps. So in step 1, admitting that I'm powerless over alcohol, that my life is unmanageable. Basically, the powerlessness over alcohol part is me understanding that I have the physical allergy to drugs and alcohol, which I kind of already talked about. And the unmanageability aspect is, basically understanding that the unmanageability that happens in my life and happened in my life is not just because of my drug and alcohol use, but is also because of my thinking, and to really understand that my best thinking is invalid. Now, for many years, that's as far as I ever got. But in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about sanity returning and us being able to trust our thinking, which is a message that often gets lost, and that's why you have people with 20 or 30 years, still running their shit by other people, or sharing from the meetings about how they're still, thinking about casing the bank when they walk in there. Casing it means like trying to figure out how to rob it, for some of you people who are not criminals. But yeah, so I don't want to be that person. There's so much hope that's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that's not passed along in the fellowship, and that was one of those things. So step 2, coming to believe that power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And I'm basically going to give you guys the contrast between what steps were for me versus what steps are for me now, So when I first came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I had no idea what a power greater than me was. I had no idea what God was. I had no concept really whatsoever. I definitely was one of those people that the book describes where I felt like, God abandoned me because I abandoned the idea of God. So I did not feel that really into my life. And a counselor that I was in jail with did some really good exercise. And basically he simplified it. He basically asked the group, and there was about 60 of us in this group, who in here doesn't know what a power greater than yourself was? And there was about 10 of us new guys, and we all raised our hand. He said, I want you guys to get in the center of the room, and I want you to huddle up and put your arms around each other and get as close to each other as you possibly can. And we did that. And he said, okay, I want the rest of the 50 guys to huddle up behind them and get as close to them as you possibly can. And just build circles around these guys in the center who don't know what a power greater than themselves are. He said, you guys in the center who don't know what a power greater than you is, take 3 steps forward and 3 steps back. And we couldn't. We couldn't get any closer to each other because we were as close as we can get, and we couldn't back up any farther because that's just where we were. He said, that's a power greater than you. And so what that meant for me was that if in step 1, I basically understand that my thinking, my decisions, my plans, and my schemes are what create the unmanageability in my life, then in step 2, if I'm willing to share with you guys about that stuff before I take action, and I'm open-minded to your suggestion on it, then there's some hope that I could be restored to sanity, And that was a very practical way of looking at step 2, because it allowed me to use you guys, which were, you were tangible. I could hear your direction, all that stuff like that, as basically a power greater than me. And that worked for a really long time, and then in step 3, made a decision to turn my will is my thinking, and my life, which is my behavior, over the care of God as I understand God. Really, in the beginning of my sobriety, just meant, okay, cool. I'm going to follow your direction, rather than do what I want to do. And the first thing that you guys directed me to do was to do an inventory, right? So I wrote out all of my resentments. I broke it down for the list first, so I had a beginning and an end, why I resented you, how it affected me, and my part was broken down into 3 separate questions. One was, where was I at fault in the relationship? The second thing was, where I behave the same way that I'm resenting you for, which is basically looking for the hypocrisy aspect. And the third is for, some of the more traumatic experiences that I had, like, being molested as a kid when I was 4. So, my very first sponsor was like, well, your part was that you were there, but that didn't really sit right for me. And that wasn't like something that can help me really grow, so I need to look at, what am I getting out of holding on to this resentment? How is that serving me today, or how am I using it to serve me? And I got to see about how I, justified promiscuity in my life because of it, how I justified not trusting men in my life, how I justified, being emotionally unavailable for people how I, basically, used it to get sympathy from people, and just basically seeing how I'm taking these things that have nothing to do with the actual present moment where heaven on earth is found, and, bringing them into my present to basically keep me a prisoner. And that was what I got out of that third question. And it allowed me a lot of freedom, and at least the path to freedom from a lot of those more traumatic experiences that I had when I was a kid. The fear inventory was basically looking at, my fears, looking at, any sort of decisions or actions that I'd taken based on these fears, and looking at the unmanageability that happened as a result of that, and the sex inventory, which is so eloquently put on page 69 in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, was very straightforward, So I wrote all this stuff out, and basically what the book tells me is that, a self-appraisal isn't honest enough. And that's because my thinking and my attachments to some of these, resentments or some of these relationships or some of these fears might still be unhealthy. So I need to read it to somebody else, which makes logical sense. Okay, cool. That makes sense. So I read it to somebody else. And one of the things that I got from that was I'm not alone, because all the things that I sort of felt shame about that I had done, someone else had done too. And the other thing was just I got to swallow a bigger pill of truth than I would have if I had just written it out and not read it to anybody. Now, steps 6 and 7 in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous are like, 2 small paragraphs. And I was really resentful of that for a while. And for a long time, I used to do steps 6 and 7 out of the 12 and 12. And I used to do this whole exercise where I used to write my defects of character, which I basically boiled down to the 7 deadly sins and threw them in a jar, and I pick out 2 a day. And, those were the 2 sins that I'd focus on that day. So let's say I got pride and lust. And whenever I felt my pride or my lust crop up in me, I'd say the 7-step prayer, and I'd take some contrary action and blah, 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 right? And in essence, that was really me just managing my defects. And the reason why I say that is because I had attachment to how healthy and how sane and how defectless I should be based on how long I'd been working on it or how long I'd been sober. And that was a really dangerous place for me to be, because then I get caught up in, okay, cool, you've been sober 8 years, Michaela, so you should be this healthy. And, that's basically removing God from the picture. Because one of the things that's written in Bill's story is that God knows neither time nor limitation. And I really like that, because to me, it's like, okay, cool, there's no limit as to how far I can grow. So all these defects can be removed, but also there's no time frame, because God does not know time, right? So for me, now it makes complete sense why there's such short paragraphs. And because basically there's nothing in about the step 6 and 7 where I'm doing anything except for being willing to have something be removed and asking for something to be removed. But I'm not removing anything. Now, what I do need, though, is I need a relationship with God, right? And I've learned that through going over the triangle, that the way that I perfect and enlarge my spiritual life is through service. Now, coincidentally, when I'm being of service and thinking about how I can be the blessing and thinking about how I can help you, I'm not thinking about if I'm better than or less than you. So I'm not judging you. I'm not thinking about being right. I'm not thinking about I'm trying to have sex with you. I'm not thinking about I need to take money from you. I'm not thinking about whether you have more or less than me. I'm not seeking validation from you. I'm not, sitting around and being lazy. So what I found is that the more that I practice the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the less I'm in defect. The more that I'm practicing service and more that I'm practicing being the blessing, the less that I'm, sitting in these things that are based in selfishness and self-centeredness. If selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of my problem, then selflessness has to be the root of my solution, right? And that's why working the program is just the logical choice. And that's where that spiritual experience comes in, that God-powered personality change is just practicing being of service. because that is the shift of personality. It's how can I be of helpful rather than how can I take from this situation. It's that whole idea of the St. Francis prayer, right? Which when I first got sober just seemed very overwhelming and impossible. So as I'm sure a lot of you know, it takes a while to get to step 6 and 7 in the big book. So if you are actually working the program diligently, and I mean like literally trying to work with someone, at least one person a day, every single day, then you will have had a lot of practice trying to be of service. And because the more that you practice something, the more you become it, you will have had that shift of personality, at least a bit, and you will definitely have had the experience of feeling connected to God through that process. So that by the time you get to steps 8 and 9, you're not just going out and making apologies to people. You're actually on different footing. You're thinking a different way. Your actions are following a different path of how can I be of service? And that's really the amends. That's really the repair. It's not behaving the way that you used to behave in life. Going back and owning your stuff with people is awesome. It's definitely something that allows us to be more present because, for me, when I go back and start cleaning up the wreckage of my past, and that's something that I'm not bringing into my present anymore, which means that I'm able to react more sanely to what's in front of me because I'm not carrying all this garbage of stuff that has nothing to do with them, right? So that is my experience with 8 and 9, and basically 8 and 9 in the book are very directional. And what I mean by that is that it's very dry, and it's just like, this is how you make amends, and this is how you talk to this person, this is how you talk to this person, the person you hate, this is how you talk to the person that you owe money to, this is how you talk to your family, blah, blah, blah. And then there's step 10. Now, step 10 is commonly misunderstood, and a lot of people that I see are basically what they've done is they've taken these worksheets or these apps and they've basically removed step 11 and given you step 11 to work step 10 on. But step 10 is basically this. I need to be vigilant or aware of when I'm being resentful, I'm being dishonest, I'm being selfish, or if I'm being in fear. Sorry about my dogs. I need to admit to God to that stuff. That's the second part of it. I need to admit to another human being that stuff. That's the third part of it. I need to make amends if I've created any wreckage. And the fifth part of the 10th step is I need to resolutely turn my thinking or my actions to how I can help another person. Now, if I've not been practicing helping other people, and that's going to seem really foreign. So that's another reason why it's so important to be working with as many people as you possibly can, besides the fact that like me working with so many people allows the message to be easier. It allows me to be more proficient at carrying the message. It allows me to be more comfortable with it. And because I have such a stable of people, I mean, there's been times in my life where I remember I was about to DJ a club. I looked at my bank account. I was supposed to travel to America to DJ for NASCAR. In about a week, they had deposited a bunch of money into my account in America to, do flights and also just, my fee and everything. And I checked my bank account right before I was playing in Bali, and my bank account was zero, right? And I had a moment of like, okay, what am I going to do? But immediately I had to DJ, so I couldn't think about it then. So I DJ'd this club. I got done with this club, right? And then I basically was calling America, found out that I had missed a tax thing in 2014, whatever, and the IRS had basically taken all my money, right? So I could have been in a whole panic mode of like, what am I going to do? How am I going to tell them NASCAR? Blah, blah, blah. They deposit money. How am I going to ask for more? Like all this stuff. I mean, I could have gone in this whole thing of like my whole year is F now, because I have a contract with this company that I've been working for 4 years. And, it's been my bread and butter in, for a while. So, but I got home and I had forgotten, but I'd set up a book session, and this was like at 3:30 a.m. And so this lady called me and I wound up doing book work. which launched me into the present moment, reminded me about my relationship with God, reminded me that I'm being taken care of no matter what. And that's what we were talking about in that session. So that by the time I get off that phone call, it's like, I feel good. The conversation that I wind up having with the IRS is not in panic mode or fear mode. It's very matter of fact, because I do not fear my creditors, like it talks about in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and everything worked out fine. And I saved myself a bunch of stress just because I have that life set up for me where I'm working with 3 or 4 people a day or whatever, right? So it's really important to, to do that part. Step 11, basically, I was afraid of meditation for a long time because I was diagnosed with ADHD, and, I was hanging on to that label and thinking I couldn't sit anywhere for any period of time and actually sit. And I had a girlfriend at, around 8 years of sobriety who wanted to start taking meditation classes. So she took me to Venice Beach, California, and we saw this meditation teacher named Light. His name was Light, which is so appropriate. And he taught me Vedic meditation. We started at 5-minute sessions, moved to 10, moved to 15, moved to 20 minutes, moved to 20 minutes twice a day. And, I found out that I was definitely able to meditate, and it's something simple. And then, of course, since I moved to Bali, my meditation practice has expanded into a lot of Balinese Hindu ritual stuff, which is, it's cool for me. I like incense. It's great. But one of the beautiful things about meditation is that I can be sitting in a room completely silent with nothing going on around me, and I can have thoughts that can evoke an emotional response. And what I learned is that, my thoughts, as powerful as they may be in that moment, they often have nothing to do with reality. And one of the beautiful things I learned from this program in the book, the program in the book, is that when they talk about that pause is what gives me that breath of air to basically decide how I want to choose to perceive the situation around me. And how I choose to perceive the situation around me dictates how I feel about the situation around me. And how I feel about the situation dictates my experience with it. So really what I get to see is that, okay, cool, like I am the master of my own universe, which really, if I really understand who I am, I, the light of God, like my spirit will be joyful at all times. That whole idea of like, okay, cool, I need to accept whether or choose to believe that God is either everything or God is nothing. What is my choice to be? I make that happen. I decide. So I'm really in control of exactly the experience that I want to have on this earth. Like that's how powerful we all are. Now, I would never have considered that if it hadn't been for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the last thing is, step 12. In the big book, working with others is really about how to do an intervention. Now, if you've been working with people throughout the whole process that you've been taken through the book, then you're going to understand how to work with different kinds of people, different personalities, blah, blah, blah. So that's not going to be such a mystery to you. Doing interventions is not necessarily something that happens too much today, mostly because Alcoholics Anonymous is not some anonymous thing anymore. Meetings are all over the world. People know where to go. This sort of like, tiptoeing around the alcoholic to kind of leave the book at their bedside to read and get back to them, then visiting them over, a period of weeks or whatever. That's like not really the course that really happens. People get thrown in treatment centers or sober livings, or interventionists get hired or whatever, So actually, when we go through the book, we don't even do that chapter. Like we stop after chapter 11. That's all I have underlined and highlighted. And the reason why is the guy who took me through the book said, you're already doing that stuff. So that was basically my process. I know I probably talked for, more than 40 minutes, but that was really it in a nutshell. And it's changed everything, So the one thing that I urge you guys to do is to really, I can't impart on you how profound working with others is. you know, taking people through this book. I mean, it really has changed my perspective on all my relationships, not only with God, but just with the people around me. It's removed all my expectations. It's allowed me a tool to constantly be present in the moment, where like I can really appreciate everything that's in front of me. I'm not slipping into fear at all. I'm not slipping into depression at all. I'm not slipping into anxiety at all. I have really recovered, you know. And for me, if you knew me and you knew the kind of sobriety that I had before this process, you would understand like what a miracle that truly is. Now, I know I can say those words, and you know, they may mean something to some of you who are actually experiencing it, but once again, unless you are actually diligently going out and proactively trying to, you know, use this fucking God-given tool to work with as many people as you can, that you're not going to know what I'm talking about. So I hope that you do, because it's really a blessing and a miracle. My dog is barking. It's time for me to end. Thank you guys. See ya.